The remote Alaskan Wildlife Research Station was not a place for sentimentality. Yet Dr. Elias Thorne, a veteran gray wolf biologist, found his objectivity shattered at the sight of the tiny, frozen bundle. The unforgiving vastness of the Denali foothills offered no quarter to the weak, and the sudden, unseasonal spring blizzard had been a brutal, efficient reaper. He had found the pup tucked deep beneath a fallen spruce, the week-old miracle of resilience near the spot where his telemetry had last pinged the mother. Escalor now, silent, a grim sign of a hunt gone terribly wrong. It was a gray wolf pup, barely a week old, discovered hypothermic and alone. Loki weighed less than a sack of flour, his eyes still a blue-hazed window into a world he was failing to enter. And his breathing was a faint, shallow whisper against the roaring silence of the Alaskan bush. Elias. Rugged and reserved after 2 decades spent in the raw, elemental heart of Alaska, had seen death many times. He was a scientist, not a savior. His life's work was to observe, to document, to preserve the wildness of Canis lupus, not to domesticate it. Yet, the sight of the vulnerable creature, a life force struggling against the inevitable cold, drove a spike of primal urgency into his professional detachment. Conventional warming methods failed, the heated incubator, the gentle friction of towels, the controlled rise in ambient temperature. Loki's internal temperature refused to budge above the critical danger line. The small, fragile body simply could not generate enough heat, nor respond to the external attempts to reignite its internal furnace. Driven by desperation, Elias did what he knew a wolf might, operating on instinct and pure body heat, would do. He stripped off his thick fleece jacket and pressed the shivering pup directly against his chest, tucking him securely inside his heavy, waterproof outer shell. The only barrier was a thin thermal shape. It was an act of pure biological mimicry, bypassing science for the ancient, undeniable truth of mammalian warmth. "You need heart, little hunter," Elias muttered, his voice a low, rough rumble. He felt the fierce, erratic beat of the tiny heart against his own, a frantic drum against the steady, slow rhythm of his veteran pulse. He became a living den, a 2-legged anchor of warmth and sound in a silent, cold world. He spent the next 48 hours in his cabin, a voluntary prisoner. Loki was a furnace of need pressed against him. Elias slept propped up in his bunk, rigid and uncomfortable, wary of crushing the precious cargo. He ate minimally, scooping cold stew with one hand, all the while maintaining constant, unwavering skin-to-fur contact. This sustained, living warmth, the steady pulse, the deep, constant breathing, the subtle scent of a large, trusted creature was the catalyst that finally worked. It was not the heat of a machine, but the undeniable, visceral connection to a living being that ultimately saved Loki. The hypothermia receded, chased away by the sheer will of shared life. When Elias finally emerged, tired, unshaven, and emotionally drained but undeniably triumphant, the tiny pup pressed against his chest was strong, vocal, and most importantly, stubbornly dependent. The phenomenon was immediate and absolute. Loki had imprinted only on Elias. The process, Elias knew, was a developmental minefield. During the crucial socialization window, which for a wolf pup is frighteningly short, extending from about 2 to 16 weeks of age, Loki's entire world, his anchor, his security, had been a human. This profound, singular bond was the core contradiction of Loki's survival. The pup would only eat when Elias held the bowl. He would whine inconsolably if the biologist left the room for even a minute. Other caretakers at the station, well-meaning and experienced, were met with outright terror. The pup's playful nips, a normal display of early wolf behavior, would instantly turn into terrified whimpers if a different human scent or touch approached him. Elias walked a tightrope. His every instinct screamed to comfort the pup, to reassure him to be the safe harbor he had become. But the scientist in him warned of the ecological and ethical catastrophe he was creating. A wolf that imprinted so intensely on a human could never join a pack. It would be a social misfit, an alien in its own species, forever anxious, stressed, and ultimately unfit for its natural life. He was inadvertently creating a pet from an animal born to lead, a wild spirit caged by misplaced affection. He had condemned Loki to a life of perpetual semi-captivity. "I saved your life," but now I have to save your identity," Elias told the pup one evening, watching Loki try to tug his beard with a soft, exploratory mouth. He knew the path forward would be one of slow, painful detachment, a withdrawal of the warmth that had first given life. The opportunity for a critical transition arrived 2 months later, just as Loki was entering the intense socialization phase, still reliant but on the cusp of greater cognitive development. The second rescue was an orphaned female, a pup named Sif, found abandoned further north. She was older, about 4 months healthier, and carried the untamed energy of her species. Having already spent critical weeks observing a wild pack before their den was tragically disrupted, Elias introduced them cautiously, initially separated by a tall, double-layered wire mesh enclosure, a standard protocol to prevent immediate aggression or intense fear. Loki, nestled safely in the crook of Elias's arm, watched Sif with a mixture of confusion, fear, and suspicion. Sif, meanwhile, mostly ignored the whimpering creature and its giant human companion, instead investigating her new habitat with the focused, quiet energy of a truly wild animal. Elias began the long, patient process of creating a bridge. He worked tirelessly, sitting between the two sides of the fence for weeks, becoming a neutral, scent-familiar presence connecting to disparate worlds. He didn't force interaction, simply allowed his presence to be the anchor that made the sight and sound of Sif tolerable for Loki. He let Loki watch Sif. He observed the larger pup playing with a discarded bone, stalking a hidden treat in the grass, and most importantly, vocalizing the language of her kind, the soft whines, the social yelps, the territorial huffs. Slowly, steadily, curiosity began to erode Loki's fear. The fear was a learned dependence. Curiosity was an instinctual pull towards his true self. He began to mimic Sif's low growls, his tail beginning to give hesitant, clumsy wags in response to her bolder play vows. Loki, the lonely human-bound soul, was seeing a reflection of himself. Vibrant, confident, free reflection. The fence came down on a clear summer day. It was a calculated risk. Elias knelt in a large, unified enclosure, Loki clinging fiercely to his neck, his claws lightly digging into the collar of his thermal shirt. When Sif bounded over, playful but undeniably dominant, Loki hesitated, his small body tensing into a familiar coil of fear. Then, driven by an instinct deeper than his learned dependence, a pure biological imperative, something in his wolf brain clicked. He slipped from Elias's grasp. A brief, decisive movement tentatively met Sif's nose. It was a moment of profound silence, a quiet, ancient greeting. It was immediately followed by a quick, clumsy wrestling match, all playful teeth, soft growls, and tangled fur. Loki was awkward, but he was participating. He was a wolf. He had found his mirror, his peer, his pack of one. Elias watched from the perimeter, kneeling by the chain-link fence, his heart full and heavy. He was no longer needed as an anchor. He was an observer again, and the sense of loss was sharp, yet entirely necessary. The visits became shorter. When Elias entered the enclosure, Loki's greetings, though still warm, were brief. A quick nose touch to the hand, a momentary recognition of the lifesaver. Before he would lope away to rejoin Sif, Loki was becoming the strong, confident young wolf he was meant to be, his amber eyes now clearing of the blue haze and the fear, replacing them with a bright, focused intelligence. He was learning to hunt, to assert, to be a wolf. The day Elias left the research station for the season was the last time he would see Loki up close. It was an unofficial farewell, a moment he took alone. He stood by the chain-link fence, watching Loki and Sif chasing each other through the tall, sun-drenched grass, two wild shapes perfectly in sync. He whispered the wolf's name, Loki. The young wolf paused, turned, and walked toward the fence. He stood tall, no longer the tiny, shivering burden, but a magnificent creature with confident, fully developed amber eyes. He was nearly Sif's size, his winter coat already beginning to grow in a rich, multi-toned gray. Loki pressed his nose against the cool metal of the fence. A gesture Elias understood perfectly. A final, gentle stroke, not of dependence, but of acknowledgement. He then turned, without looking back, and loped away, rejoining Sif in the fading Alaskan twilight. They disappeared together into the dense spruce line, a self-contained, perfect unit of the wild. Elias felt the painful but necessary ache of letting go. He had risked everything, his professional standing, his own emotional defenses, to save a life. And in the final act, he had taught that wild heart how to love, and more importantly, how to live without it. Loki was safe, not because of a human's arms, but because he finally belonged to the wild world that was his birthright. He has turned from the fence, the true mission finally complete. The wolf was a wolf, and the man was once again just a biologist.